A 16-year-old child was found unresponsive in his cell in HMP YOI Feltham. He was then taken to hospital. He died later that night. Not an adult prisoner, not a fully grown man, a child. And before anyone runs in the comments, well, what was he in for? Stop. The first question is this: how does a child become so seriously unwell inside a prison that he's found unresponsive, taken to hospital, and dies later the same evening? That does not mean we pretend we know exactly what happened, because we don't. What has been reported is that a 16-year-old Eda Duarte was found unresponsive at Feltham Young Offender Institution on Monday 20th of April. London ambulance service was called at around 9:30 p.m. He was then taken to hospital and died at 11:43. Police treated the death as unexpected, and the Prison and Probation Ombudsman is investigating. Police treat this death as unexpected as any other death at the age of 16. They are too young to die, and hence why it's unexpected. The Prison and Probation Ombudsman are also investigating, as well as the coroner. So I'm going to be very, very clear. I am not here to tell you exactly how he died. I'm not here to accuse one specific person. And I'm not here to turn a child's death into prison gossip. But I am here to say this without softening it. A child was found unresponsive in custody, and he died later in the hospital. And the system does not get the luxury of silence. It has to answer, because custody is control. It controls his door, his movement, his access to healthcare, who he spoke to, whether he could get away from threats. They control the environment around those children. So in the investigation, they can't just start and end with the moment when he was found. They have to go backwards into that day, into that week, into his medical history, into his risk assessment, into what staff and healthcare knew before this emergency happened. Final moment is only one part of the story. The warning signs before that moment matter too. And this is where the story becomes even more serious. At the opening of the inquest, the coroner heard that Eda had recently been diagnosed with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. It's a heart rhythm condition. He was diagnosed in West Middlesex University Hospital in about December 2025. He was complaining about heart palpitation, dizziness and chest pain. The coroner said it appeared no review or follow-up by the hospital had happened since, and statements are expected from the NHS Trust running the hospital and from the NHS Trust providing healthcare at Feltham. That changes the whole shape of this story, doesn't it? Because now this is not just a question of what happened in a cell. It also is a healthcare question. If a 16-year-old child had a known heart condition and had already presented with palpitations, dizziness, chest pain, that information should not have been just floating around disconnected from the prison managing him. It should have been visible to healthcare staff. It should have been picked up through reception screening or his medical records. Any hospital discharge information should have followed him. Any required cardiology follow-up should have been tracked. And if there were symptoms before he was found, staff and healthcare needed to understand that those symptoms could matter. And I want to be really careful here, because grief and medical language can become very confusing very, very quickly. His girlfriend had reportedly described the condition as non-life threatening. Whilst I understand why a grieving family might say that, especially if that's what they genuinely believed or what they had been told, but not usually life-threatening is not the same as it cannot be life-threatening. Some people with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome live normal lives. Some may never even have serious complication, but in some cases, heart rhythm conditions can become very dangerous. And according to medical reports, they can result in sudden death when it comes to this particular condition. This is exactly why the coroner is looking at whether his underlying heart condition played a role. So the question is not whether every person with this condition is in immediate danger, because they aren't. But the question is whether this particular child, his diagnosis, his symptoms, risk level, and follow-up by healthcare were properly managed before he died. And that timeline will matter so much. Now, the stabbing that he was convicted of appears to relate to an incident in Brighton in September 2025. So, as much as I can't confirm the exact date, we do know that he was being held in youth detention awaiting sentencing since about mid-September. And we know that his heart condition was diagnosed in December 2025, so several months before he died. That gap really matters. If he was already in custody when he was diagnosed, that diagnosis should have travelled back into the prison healthcare system. If he entered custody after diagnosis, it should have been picked up when he came in anyway. Either way, there should have been a paper trail showing what was known, who knew it, what follow-ups were expected, and whether anyone took actual ownership of it, because this is exactly where people fall through the cracks. Sometimes because healthcare, prisons, staff, courts, hospitals, families, all of those, and outside agencies all hold little pieces of the puzzle, but nobody actually joins them together. And when that happens in custody, it's the person locked in the system who pays the price. Now, there is another quite uncomfortable layer. Edda was reportedly awaiting sentencing for stabbing another teenager in Brighton. That doesn't actually prove that his death was a retaliation. It does not prove any gang involvement. It does not prove another young person was involved in what happened to him. But it does raise that risk picture, doesn't it? A child coming into custody from a serious youth violence case should trigger more than just basic reception process. It's not just the offence, but it's the conflict around the offence, the people involved, postcode issues, retaliation risk, keeper parts, the intelligence from police, youth offending teams, social care, family, and court. Because young men don't just leave street conflict as a prison gate. They really don't. Sometimes, very rarely actually, custody actually freezes that kind of conflict, but most of the time, it just imports it into prison and concentrates it. So if a child is involved in youth violence, organised crime groups, threat, debt, retaliation, or even reputation politics, in a lot of cases, custody makes it worse. Because outside, that child might run. Inside, he cannot. Outside, conflict might be spread across streets, phones, estates, schools, social media, God knows where. But inside, those conflicts can be compressed into just wings, landings, exercise yards, maybe education and association periods. That is not a safe environment just because the door is locked. A locked door can protect, but it can also trap. This is why the little paperwork bits, the risk assessments, matter so much. This is why intelligence matters. This is why staff knowing the background of the situation matters. Not to punish him more, but to keep him alive and safe. Now, let's talk about the reported marks. Inside Time reported that his girlfriend claimed he appeared to have marks and bruising on his body. That is a reported claim. It's not an official finding, and the official cause of death has not been confirmed publicly. So I'm not going to state a fact that he was assaulted because we haven't seen the body. I haven't seen the body. But from experience, I know that a dead body does not present in a normal, natural way. And there might be some unexplained marks and bruises that she might not have seen before. Especially to an untrained eye, especially to a family who's looking for desperately for a cause of how did he get here, especially to a loving 16-year-old girlfriend. However, if those marks that she saw or injuries are confirmed by the coroner, investigators will need to establish what they were, when they happened, whether they were connected to his death, whether they could have resulted from emergency medical treatment, or whether they point to something else completely. Because that timing really matters. If he was found unresponsive late that night, that only tells us when the emergency became visible. It doesn't tell us everything that happened earlier. It doesn't tell us whether he had complained of any health symptoms. And now, I really want to address the claim that I've seen sort of floating around. A lot of people are saying, well, in every prison, bang up is at 5 p.m, so it must have been officers that have gone into a cell and assaulted him. That's not evidence. That is a guess, and a dangerous one at that. Because prison regimes vary massively. In some jails, evening lockup happens earlier. In some enhanced units, in, for example, Risley or women's estate like Bronzefield, prisoners can remain out late into the evening till about 10 p.m, sometimes using privacy keys until night staff secure the doors at 10 and complete the roll checks. In many prisons nowadays, evening lockup and roll checks often happen around medication rounds, the evening ones, sometimes around 7:30 p.m. depending on the jail, the wing, staff and levels, healthcare and the regime that day. Night staff will do their own checks again later, often around handover, sometimes around 9 p.m. till 9:30. But here's the point. We don't know the exact Feltham A regime on that unit that night. We don't know whether he had been behind his door for hours. We don't know whether he had been out for his evening medication. We don't know whether he came out for a checkover because he had some symptoms and he just wanted to see the nurse. We don't know whether he seemed fine at one check and became unwell afterwards. And from experience, sudden medical emergency are not always discovered because an officer randomly just appears at your door and finds you. Very often, it's the other lads on the landing that are first to realise something's wrong because somebody suddenly stops talking. Someone shouts in pain. Someone collapses and then stops responding completely. And then they bang on the door. They go on the bells. Miss, sir, boss, whatever. He's not well. Help him, help him, help him. I'm not saying for definite this is what happened here, but I'm saying it's a very realistic possibility. So when people say he was found at 9:30, nobody checked on him until just then. Or he must have been assaulted by staff. They must have gone in later on at night. They are basically jumping over the actual timeline. The investigation needs the real sequence. Lockup, medication, roll checks, night staff handover, healthcare contact, any emergency bells that he might have pressed, any shouting from other lads, any symptoms he reported, cell entries, body worn, CCTV. This is how you find the truth. You won't get it by filling in the gaps that will just get you the most outrage online. Actually, there is another quite interesting detail that matters. His mother was first told he had died in the prison, and then later they changed their mind and told that he died in a hospital. That doesn't prove intentional wrongdoing because in emergency situations, early confirmation might be confused. Details move fast. Prison staff, police, ambulance, hospital, family liaison officer, they can overlap in a chaotic situation. But to a grieving mother, that's not a small detail. For a mother, it's the difference between he died in prison or he died in a hospital. It's not a technicality. It changes the picture in her head of her child's final moments. It affects the trust. It affects the grief. It affects whether she believes she's being told the truth. So if conflicting information are being given, that has to be explained properly. Communication with the family is not admin. It's humanity. It's dignity. And no family should be left trying to piece together the child's final moments from headlines, rumours, or social media. The whole investigation, especially the coroner's one, has to test every reasonable possibility. Medical emergency, missed healthcare, delayed response, self-harm, violence, restraint, staff assault, intimidation, or combination of several of those factors. Not because we accused before evidence, but because a child was found unresponsive inside a prison and died. And that means every single thing needs to be examined. I want to reiterate here. The prison doesn't just investigate a death in custody itself and just move on. And because this was also a child, that adds another layer of safeguarding. That is the one pretty much key difference between a child death and an adult death in custody. The core process, like I said, it's similar. Police, PPO, coroner, inquest. But because he was under 18, child death review and safeguarding processes may also have to apply. Because this is not just a prisoner death. It's a death of a prisoner, but a child. I keep saying it. He was a child. And I want to widen the lens outside of Feltham for a little bit, because babies have died inside women's prisons too. Baby Aisha Cleary was born and died at HMP Bronzefield in 2019 after her mother gave birth alone in a prison cell. Baby B was stillborn after her mother gave birth in her cell at HMP Style in 2020. And baby C, born in October 2023 at HMP YOI Foston Hall, is listed by the PPO as still a pending investigation. Now, babies in mother and baby units are not prisoners, quite clearly. They are not serving sentences. They haven't been convicted of anything, obviously. But if a baby dies inside a prison, there are still questions to be answered. This is the thread running through all of it. A child in a YOI, a newborn in a women's prison, a pregnant woman behind a locked door. They are not ordinary custody risks. They are human beings whose safety depends almost entirely on the system working properly. And when those systems fails, it's not just a bad inspection report at the end. It's a family burying a child. A child who went into Feltham alive, but he will never get to go home. You know what I do on this channel. I say the quiet parts out loud. And today, saying things out loud means this: a prison sentence should never become a death sentence. And before I wrap this up, hi, my name is Dagna and I was a prison officer in the UK for 6 years. I've stood on the inside of the system and I have seen what the headlines missed. This is Inside Out Justice, is when we say the quiet parts out loud.